Welcome back to the CTO Playbook, the podcast dedicated to helping CTOs excel. I'm your host, Adam Horner. With 30 years in the industry, including over a decade as a CTO, I have coached and mentored more than 100 engineers and tech leaders. This podcast covers crucial topics for CTOs, providing insights, strategies, and practical advice to help you excel in your role. When I first became a CTO, I joined Steven Renwick as co-founder and CTO of Satago, the startup he founded originally to help small businesses in the UK get paid on time. In this episode, Steven and I talk about the relationship between the CEO and the CTO in early stage startups, including his expectation for the CTO to be several steps ahead of where the technology is going, and his one key piece of advice to ensure you meet the expectations of your CEO. Hello. So, Steven, welcome onto the podcast.
Thank you, Adam. It's great to be here as your first guest.
Awesome. So we've obviously got a bit of a background. So let's start off talking about the first CEO-CTO relationship that you had, which was with me, and how you became a CEO in the first place.
So I became a CEO in the first place because I started this company, Satago, as a solo non-technical founder, which is especially unpopular with investors. And I was told very clearly early on, we only found we only invest in companies when they have a technical co-founder. So I went on a hunt to find a co-founder. And after a pretty long search, which was when I spoke to a lot of people, we met and we hit it off pretty quickly. You joined me as my co-founder into a very embryonic stage business. I discovered, much to my amusement, that people really cared a lot more about your background than mine when we were speaking to investors. And then, I was CEO of this little startup and you were my CTO and we were co-founders.
Because I remember you wrote about it at one point using the analogy of getting engaged.
Yeah, I mean, because it encompasses the whole process. You have to, first of all, find someone to get engaged to. So I treated that quite like a sales process. I had a CRM system set up in my Gmail, and I posted in various places. I think in the end, you found me via a post in workinstartups.com. I'm not sure if that still exists, but I still actually have access to that CRM. So I could still see the pipeline that I had of people that I was speaking to. And if I remember correctly, I was kind of close to going with someone. I can't remember who. And I thought I'd have one last look through the CRM to see if I was missing anyone. And I think I had missed an email from you suggesting we have a chat. So I contacted you and we did have a chat. And your life and work circumstances made sense for you to join a startup at that point, which was great for me. And you were ready to jump in with both feet. You were ready to hand in your notice to you were working for Palantir at the time. So it was a pretty nice job. And you were ready to hand in your notice before we'd even met. We'd had like a Skype call or something. And I said, well, hold on a minute. Let's actually meet in person first, because I was due to be in London the week after.
That's right, because you were based in Berlin and you still are based in Berlin, right?
That's right. I'm based in Berlin. And at that time, I was semi-regularly in London. And eventually, as you know, it became that I was commuting between Berlin and London. So I was effectively living in Berlin and coming to London every week to work together on the startup, because this was kind of before remote working was really trendy and acceptable, thanks to good old COVID.
Yeah, it wasn't accepted back then at all, really, was it?
Yeah, those people definitely frowned a bit when I told them I was flying in and out of Berlin every week.
But we made it work. What were some of the key factors then that made you feel like we would work well together before we even got working together?
I think on a personal level, there was like instant chemistry. We got on well very quickly together. One of my fears when I was looking for a technical co-founder was, how do I know if this person is actually technically any good? And I would almost get a little bit suspicious when people were too enthusiastic, because for some people, I think they could smell money and wanted to just get on a kind of startup, get rich journey. And of course, most engineers, I couldn't really judge their technical capabilities. But with your background, being at Palantir, I knew that Palantir had pretty high standards. So if you were working for Palantir, then I could quite trust that you were at least a good engineer. And I thought we got on well. And you believed in my vision. I didn't feel like you were going to be trying to effectively override the vision. It was important to have someone that was bought into the vision, but the vision was kind of coming from me. And it was that slightly different dynamic from maybe regular founders, is that I started it a little bit before you came in, but that still, worked out well for us.
Right. So, that was a key thing, is that I was a slightly late joiner into your venture. You'd already sort of had it up and running. You'd already been pitching it for about 9 months before I joined in, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So I had raised a small amount of money, like £30,000, by being literally the first company on Seedrs, the equity crowdfunding platform. I used that £30,000 to pay for a freelancer, like 2 freelancers, one to work on the front end, one to work on the back end. And we were lucky that the back end engineer was exceptionally good, effectively worked like he was a full-time employee in the company, would help me with kind of interviewing people. And, although you and I are no longer involved with Satago, he is actually still he is now a full-time employee. He was a freelancer.
And he's in fact relocated, isn't he?
He has relocated from Russia to London and is considered like effectively employee number 1 of Satago, which I think he is.
Which, yeah, he definitely was, certainly back in the day, because he was one of the key people I was talking to sort of find out about the tech stack and what you'd built so far. To be honest, from my perspective, one of the reasons why there was a bit of credibility there, that you built something solid and real, a code base that was running and operational. And so that gave me an element of expectation in terms of what to expect from you, because you knew where you were going, you had this vision. So what were some of the things that you expected from me as a CTO in your position? Because I think for our listeners, that's one of those things that isn't always the most obvious thing. What's inside the CEO's head? What do they want from me?
Yeah, well, at that time, the engineer that we had, Dmitry, was very capable. And as you said, that's one of the things that attracted you to the business. And we had a very good relationship, which I think, made it good, look like I must be a good at kind of managing technology. Yeah, I didn't want to be the one managing the technology. Obviously, I should have been doing other things. I should have been working on the sales and the marketing side of the business. So there's no way I could keep managing the business like that. And then we obviously wanted to raise some investment so we could expand the team. There was no chance that the freelancer in Russia, was going to be the kind of managing the team, because he was actually running his own consulting company, which was what was technically working for us. So I needed somebody who effectively was managing everything internally while I was managing everything externally. Like I said, I had this kind of vision for where the company was going to go. The technology was critical to that, because back when we were starting, we kind of considered it like what might be a cliche to say, but a big data play. So I knew that having solid infrastructure was going to be important. We were also heavily dependent on connections to other software platforms, like the accounting software platform. So it really was a company that needed to have not just good software for running an application independently, but a software solution that was reliable, scalable, was going to handle big data, was going to interact with other systems in a reliable way, because it was going to be a relatively critical software for those companies. So basically not having to worry about the tech and not having to worry that what we were building would be appropriately architected, if that's a word, for the stage of the company.
Yeah. So a lot of that was technical, wasn't it, in terms of your expectations? And so that must have evolved, because you mentioned just a moment ago about one looking inwards and one looking outwards. Was that sort of an early expectation you have, or was that something sort of evolved as the way of working between the two of us? Because I also remember looking inward quite a lot, everything from HR to processes and operations. But was that something that was deliberate early on, or was that something that evolved over time?
I think it's always been my principle of the main difference between the CEO and either the CTO, or you might say later on that would become the COO's job, but initially it's more likely to be the CTO's job. And I think that reflects partly my personality, that I'm not like the most super organized, structured person. And if you want to have the internal stuff being well structured and organized, it's better that it's the engineering guy. And that was definitely you were the well structured person. But yeah, that's always been my principle, is the CEO should be mostly outward facing, should be the face of the company. You're dealing with customers, PR and investors and hiring mostly, which is all external facing. And once you bring those things into the company, then, that's where you're kind of not necessarily having to be the one that's driving things there.
Awesome. And how did that change? Because we brought a COO alongside as well. So how did that change, do you think, when we had a COO as well?
Well, when we had a COO, at that stage, the company was getting a lot more complicated. So we were evolving into becoming not just a fintech business, but actually a finance business. So we were lending money to people, and we needed to have departments that were not typical to a tech company. So a tech company doesn't normally need to have a credit risk department and a credit control department. And those are definitely internal processes that need to be managed, but they shouldn't be getting managed by the CTO. They should be managed by either a chief risk officer or a chief operations officer. So at the time we were looking for, I think we were looking for just one person. I can't remember if it was a chief risk officer or the COO we were looking for, but we ended up taking both on. And again, one of them is still there. One of them is now I think one of them who joined as the head of risk is maybe now the COO. And we had a very capable COO as well, who came, I think brought us a lot of credibility because she came from a good role at a big company. And yeah, we had a good working relationship with her as well, but she didn't stay so long. I think she left. Yeah, she left before we exited.
So let's go back to technology there, or at least the role of the CTO. Were there any sort of steps, do you think, that sort of built your confidence in me as the CTO?
I can very well remember my initial impression, which was that you were spending a long time, what I called then feathering your nest. So it was like you were an expectant mother and, you were getting the house ready for this new chaotic arrival. So you got a lot of the processes into place for how to quickly publish software or how to quickly launch products. So, we spent quite a lot of time setting up the right Jira flows, setting up the ways that the software would be deployed so that it was a very fast deployment, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember that took, I don't know how long it was. Maybe it was like 1 month, maybe it was even 2 months. But I remember thinking, why are we doing this? This isn't making any difference to the product. And, arguably that would be the correct thing to think is you just need to, ship. Just get code out there fast. But I was like, no, I'm not the expert here. I'm going to let Adam feather his nest. He's obviously expecting, some new arrivals. And it turned out that was the right thing to do. You didn't over-engineer it. This wasn't about the software or the actual application. This was about our infrastructure. And we ended up, I think, having a very, very professional software deployment process that enabled us to ship very quickly and even roll back very quickly if we needed. And I remember one of the first engineers that joined said that was like his biggest learning from us was how to professionally develop and deploy software. These young engineers were joining us because they had the confidence that they would learn from you. Yeah,
and some of them with some great backgrounds as well. We had people joining from the likes of Facebook, as was.
Yeah, exactly. That's who I was thinking of. He'd had experience at Facebook and in an investment bank, and it was only really once he came to us that I think he learned how to properly deploy software.
Cool. That's definitely the first time I've been described as a bird, so I think that's probably a good thing. So the CI/CD process, getting changes out quickly, getting features out quickly. Were there any, do you think, sort of big mistakes that I made as your CTO? This is a wonderful question to be able to ask you because there's no holds barred here. Not going to throw anybody else under the bus.
No, I don't think there was any mistakes that I could say you made as a CTO. There were mistakes that we made as co-founders, which is maybe a topic for a different podcast. And we had, occasional, what would you say, emergencies, like software-wise. And, there was one or two times. There's one time we had a problem with the software that made me feel physically sick, which was, that was a bit disturbing. But, it wasn't like it was your fault. There was just a bug in the software, which was quite major. And you guys worked on it while I was, not able to do anything about it. But I can't really say that you did anything wrong as a CTO. I mean, the teams function, it's not like the teams were massive, but the teams functioned very well. The software ended up being exceptionally good. I mean, you might remember that when we were in the process of selling the business, quite often people remarked is like, how did you manage to build so much product with such a small team? We effectively were running 3 or 4 entire products in one business, which is not what a sensible tech company should do.
And that, I think that comes back to the heart of where we went wrong as founders, wasn't it? Trying to do a lot and pivoted hard a couple of times.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we maybe bit off a bit more than we could chew. Our biggest challenge was always like positioning and marketing. It wasn't nothing to do with the tech. The point is, at the end of the day, the tech and the product was what was amazing about that company. We just didn't manage to distribute it well enough. So any mistakes were more on this side of the table than yours.
Well, talking about that, let's transition up to where you are now, because you're now working at a startup called TiloRes. Why don't you sort of fill in the gap from the end of Satago up to how you became to TiloRes?
Sadly, neither of us became rich from Satago, so we were forced to continue in employment. And in 2018, I joined a company in Berlin called Regis24 as the chief product officer. Regis is a consumer credit bureau. So Satago is in a way like working with relatively large volume business credit data. We also partnered with the business credit bureaus in the UK. This was a consumer credit bureau in Germany. And in that consumer credit bureau, we developed some data infrastructure technology for managing the data, specifically to deduplicate and link record data and make it searchable. And it was very, very good technology, or is very good technology. So I proposed to the shareholders that we spin it out into a separate company. I did that. And then I took with me the CTO of the credit bureau and the lead engineer who had invented the technology as my co-founders. So I've now got 2 co-founders, and the roles there are a little bit different from when we were doing it.
Cool. So why don't you talk about that then? Because it's a very different way of approaching. First of all, you went out to go and find me, and here you joined the company later on, and they were already there. So how did that go in terms of building a relationship with them, and particularly with the CTO as well?
Yeah, so that's been a really one of our strengths, is that we'd already been working together for 3 years before we even started the company. Now, day to day in that credit bureau, I worked with the CTO on a daily basis because I was the CPO, he was the CTO, so we were very close. And my other co-founder was lead engineer, so he worked very closely with the CTO, but not with me. So we knew each other and we spoke, but we didn't work closely. But we trusted each other, which is the important thing. I trusted we had a very good technology. And when we did the spin out, we kind of had a bit of a discussion about what do we actually do with the job titles here. And this is where it's a little bit strange in a way, is that one of my co-founders, Stefan, is the inventor of the technology, and Hendrik is the former CTO of where it was invented. Both of them, we actually have a patent pending, and both of them are the 2 inventors on the patent. But Hendrik is more of a systems kind of operations management CTO. He's not like a coding CTO. And Stefan is a incredibly good engineer, like the kind of fabled 10x engineer. But, and he would be the first person to admit this, he's definitely not a people manager. So initially we started off calling Hendrik the CTO, and we called Stefan the CDO, so Chief Development Officer, but then nobody knows what CDO is. So we switched it again more recently to say that Hendrik is the CPO, so Chief Product Officer, and Stefan is the CTO. And look, we're only 4 people. We have 1 engineer. Because the technology is already quite advanced, because we developed it in a much bigger company, we don't need so much engineering resource right now. So it's not like there's actually any people management to do, because that engineer came from the credit bureau, and we just work intuitively based on trust with each other. We will have to consider how that works once we expand and grow the team a bit, because you need to think about people management versus technology management.
Yeah, so and it's such a small team, it's just a very different relationship, isn't it?
Exactly. There's no real person management necessary, because our 1 engineer has also been working with us for years.
Did he come with you out of Regis as well?
He came with us out of the credit bureau. Yeah. So we've all been working together for years.
And in fact, you haven't done any recruiting at all then, or have you?
No, we've done no recruiting. We've not recruited anyone. We've got a couple of freelancers working with us on sales and marketing, but that's it. Yeah.
So that must be quite a different relationship then, because I think at the moment you're sort of consolidating your go-to-market and the way that you actually put your technology out into the marketplace. Is that sort of fair to say? Yeah,
that's what we're doing. I mean, we're still pretty early stage. We've got customers, we've got revenue, we've got a pretty cool pipeline, but we've got incredibly diverse use cases, because this data unification technology can be used for everything from fraud prevention anti-money laundering, through to customer data management, through to product data management for RFP automation. So we've got incredibly diverse use cases, which is bad for a startup. You want to focus on one thing. So we're working quite a lot on positioning just now to try and say, where do we want to focus? So that is, we know exactly that that's the problem, but it's not an easy problem to solve because it's also mostly enterprise sales. Like this, our tech is fixing problems that are usually from big companies, which means that the feedback cycles are pretty long.
Yeah, and the sales cycles also quite long.
Exactly. The sales cycles are crushingly long.
So in terms of your expectations on your CTO, well, in fact, on both of your co-founders, what would you say are the sort of the key things that you expect from them as sort of the senior techies in your family relationship?
I mean, really for our CTO now, Stefan, it's about being as cutting edge in the technology as possible. So that's the obvious difference between kind of becoming scale up and being proper startup is as scale up, you don't expect your CTO to be like the lead engineer, like the super brain behind it that's actually writing the code. At this stage, with only 2 people, it has to be Stefan that's writing the code because he is effectively the brains behind the whole business. And to be honest, if he's not writing code, he's not happy. So he wants to write code. He doesn't want to be managing people. He doesn't necessarily want to be just thinking about the technology. He wants to be there at the coalface doing the work himself. Whereas my other co-founder, Hendrik, who's CPO, it makes a very complementary team in terms of how we bridge each other. So Hendrik, as the CPO, fits very nicely between myself and Stefan. So he's not like a coding CTO, but he's obviously worked with big data, big infrastructure systems before. He's worked at very big companies like Awin, and he can bridge the kind of technical business language side of things. So he's quite similar to yourself in that respect. And I can bring him into sales meetings effectively as the sales engineer, and he, brings a very good level of confidence to the customers. He can talk at just the right level for them. Whereas when it gets super, super technical and like the data science, data matching type stuff, then it's better for Stefan to come in. But really, he would rather be just working on the code, not necessarily speaking to the customers.
And how do you think that's going to change over the next 6 to 12 months, assuming that you are successful in terms of finding your way to market and bringing up more employees?
Yeah, good question. Right. So, I mean, we will need to have more engineers, but I can't see us having more than like maybe a total team of 5 back-end engineers in the near term. And I think what we'll probably end up doing is having Stefan as the CTO responsible for the technology, like responsible for the development of the technology, but maybe not people management. And we will just make Hendrik as the CPO responsible for people management. And, why would we not do that? We would not do that because we get told all the time by VCs that it's got to be this way. Sounds like, I'm thinking, that's just like the tail wagging the dog. Why do we don't have to be conventional? We can do whatever we want. We can structure it however we want. It's whatever works for us. And like, it's not like we're going to jump from 4 people to 400 people. Things are going to grow slowly. We're trying not to grow too fast. We don't want to suddenly add like a 10, 20, 30 person tech team. It might go up to 5 people. I think we will manage, and also hiring is slow, right? So I think we will manage to grow the team without creating any kind of shocks by suddenly having too many people. And if we hire senior people, like we probably will aim for like quality over availability, then, and you give them, you trust them and give them responsibility to work on what they think is important, but still following the kind of the company North Star, then I think for this next stage, it will be okay. And that's as far as I'm thinking.
That's amazing that you didn't mention cost once through there. And I kind of expected you to in terms of the cost to bringing on more engineers, because I know that that's often when I speak to other CEOs, a fairly key point, especially now with the economics the way they are.
I mean, literally in terms of cost, yes, because engineers are not cheap. Despite any economic downturns, I don't want to suddenly add 100,000 euros of cost to the company for no reason. So yeah, we will only add engineers when the kind of the revenue makes sense. It's getting to the point now where we're very busy with the number of projects we're working on, and our software usually needs some level of onboarding which takes up a bit of time. So it's not like just sign up and off you go like it was with Satago. You need some engineering involvement, and that does slow down actual development on the software. So we'll have to think a little bit about how we handle that, because for the onboarding, you effectively need sales engineers, but that's not constant, right? Because maybe we onboard 1 or 2 new POCs a month, but the rest of the time, they need to be working on writing software.
So obviously that building the software is a very key point for you then. So in this early stage, what I think of as being sort of the maker CTO stage, in terms of the growth of a CTO, it seems that you've got very much what you characterize as an R&D approach to the CTO there.
Yeah, he's definitely like the R&D leader. You could almost call him a chief scientific officer, because, it's kind of like we're working on a field of data science.
Right. So what would you say then between you and him as a CTO in that role? What would you say is the most important thing? Because clearly you've ruled out people management as one of the most important things then. So in terms of your relationship there, what do you think are probably the most important tips for him as a CTO relating to you as much as the other way around?
The thing that I always want to feel is that as the kind of R&D or maker CTO, that he is always 1 or 2 or 3 steps ahead in terms of thinking about the vision of the technology and where it's going to go. Because it is admittedly difficult for as the non-technical CEO to always feel like you're completely abreast of everything in what's a relatively complicated space. And, what TiloRes is much more technical than Satago was. I mean, Satago was solving problems for small businesses, which I could, understand pretty easily. Whereas what we're doing, is like kind of more like a database type technology. It can get pretty tricky. And then you start straying into things like vector databases and large language models and stuff, and get quite complicated. And I don't want to be having to be myself at the cutting edge of the tech. I mean, I obviously keep up with it, but I really want him to be thinking of that. And, I like knowing that if I ask a technical question, which has always got some business background to it, knowing that he will have the answer. And the good thing is as well, is that he is business pragmatic, right? It's not like he just wants to build for the sake of building cool stuff. He wants to get customers paying for it so he can build more cool stuff.
So if I to summarize that then, you want to make sure that he's several steps ahead in terms of where the technology is and where it's going. I always love Wayne Gretzky's quoting this on, you skate to where the puck is going, not where it is now. So you want to make sure that he's ahead. You want to make sure that he is able to answer your business-oriented but questions with a deeply technical background. And you want to make sure that he is pragmatic in that he understands the business value behind the technology he's building, even if that his intentions are that's just that he can build more cool technology in the future.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we all want to get paid at the end of the day. We all want to work on what's fun. If writing code about entity resolution software is what makes fun for you, then, it's very fair to fund it through customer revenues.
Yeah, indeed. And so one of the things that comes up quite often with engineers is documentation. So how do you rely on documentation, and what do you think of as being sort of the important aspects of documentation from your perspective of the technology?
Oh, wow. Okay. So, I mean, practically speaking, I guess we've got 4 sources. Whatever goes into Slack, whatever goes into Confluence, and both of those are at random, then we should have our docs being up to date. And I guess they're up to date to a degree. I think they probably could be better. And we also do use a GraphQL API, which I am frequently told means that it is self-documenting.
It sounds like you have a bit of skepticism around that.
Well, I don't exactly know what it means, but it sounds good. And apparently it's true, right? So it means that, some of the functionality of the API is documented in the API itself. So that sort of takes some of the burden off at least the documentation of the API. However, what you learn when you're selling software is nobody reads documentation anyway, regardless of how well it is written.
So support becomes a crucial aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't lie. Our software is quite complicated to set up and start using. So we always do a POC for the customers. But we do have some people that kind of run and manage it themselves. And, you'll maybe release a new feature and they'll try and use it. They don't understand it. And they don't understand it for or it doesn't work for them for a fairly simple reason that suggests they've perhaps not looked at the documentation. And that's one of those fields where I think large language models can actually help quite a lot, because if your documentation is good, you can effectively ask a large language model what's going on rather than needing to ask actual human support.
I wonder how far I would get in before AI came up. So LLMs, you do see those as a crucial part of the forward planning for your business then?
Yes, and we maybe didn't expect that. So we've never positioned ourselves as an AI company because a lot of what we do is rules-based, explicitly not AI for various reasons, including compliance. But recently we have integrated large language models into TiloRes. There's two levels here. One is there's onboarding. So we've discovered that large language models can actually help you set up TiloRes, actually by understanding some of the documentation and understanding some of the workflows for getting the initial setup correct. That needs a lot more work to actually ever be released. But we've also used large language models to input data into TiloRes and to make the data usable. So a large language model is quite good at classifying something which is semi-unstructured. So if you have everything in one field, we do this with product matching sometimes, a large language model is quite good at extracting the information out of that one field and then saying, okay, they're actually talking about this product from this category and this quantity. And then once you've got all this data in TiloRes, normally you would query the data via the API and you get records of data back. But if you want to interact with it in a more natural language route, then large language model seems to work quite well as well.
So using that almost as the interface to the core technology you're building rather than using that as the core technology of yours.
Oh yeah, it's definitely not the core technology. It's not going to work as the core technology. But for interacting with the data, it can be quite good. And we've had a lot of interest from people recently about using us as a so-called RAG source, so retrieval augmented generation, because normally you would use a vector database, which works fine for like documents, to actually understand reams of text about documents, like say an insurance policy. But if you want to have a source of data, which is your customer database or your product database or your clinical record database, then something like TiloRes works much better as a source of truth about that highly critical structured data.
And so I think we can see that the world of data is changing quite a lot with LLMs and AI in general as we move towards something that OpenAI hope will end up with AGI at some point in the fuzzy future. They're not sure when. It's clearly changing the role of the CTO as well in terms of how development is done, in terms of how effective developers can be, and in terms of the levels of seniority developers that we've spoken about elsewhere. But what do you see as the future in terms of the CEO-CTO relationship due to the way that, for example, the AI changed the industry, but also other things like low-code and no-code tools as well?
Yeah, I was going to say the low-code and no-code stuff is interesting, and the AI only makes it arguably more interesting because all those things combined mean it's theoretically significantly easier to build a kind of bog-standard software business. If what you're building itself is kind of, cutting edge, is deep tech, or kind of infrastructure tech like us, you can't build that with like no code. But if you're building a regular SaaS product, then you should be able to do it in some kind of low code solution with help from AI. AI is already writing software, it's getting better at writing software, it's getting better at reviewing software. So I think that you're going to need less engineering resource in future, or you should be able to achieve more with less. And what that usually results in is that investors, if you're going down the VC route, will expect you to have achieved a hell of a lot more before you ever look at raising investment. Because, if low code and no code combined with Gen AI can do so much, then you don't need to come to them for, €1 million of funding to build your MVP. You can get most of the way there already. The question of whether or not the business guy can do that on his own is questionable. So you probably still need that CEO-CTO relationship, not least because a founder doing this on their own, it's a pretty tough journey, right? It's, apart from handing over responsibilities to the CTO, you're also sharing the psychological toil and burden with them.
That's an important aspect of being a co-founder.
Yeah, exactly. That's not going to go away because of Gen AI, unless you're using like a Gen AI therapist.
Which is also probably possible, but...
Yeah. Hello, ChatGPT. My board member just started screaming at me. What should I do?
Pretty interesting conversation on its own.
Yes.
So in terms of developing the role of the CEO, CTO, I mean, my view is that the number of engineers that we need is going to reduce, just like you said. But I sort of foresee a time where the pressure on the product side is going to become proportionally greater because the number of people it takes to understand the customer, understand this very rapidly moving marketplace is not going to get less. In fact, it's probably going to get harder to figure that out, while at the same time, the cost of building is getting smaller. The number of people needed is smaller, and probably the number of senior engineers that don't want to manage people is going to remain about the same. And so I think it'll almost diminish the role of the CTO in the executive suite. That probably holds true at the larger end of the scale. But in terms of the early stage startups, where you've sort of been for the last 10 years, do you see the same sort of thing?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Maybe one other thing to think of is that we're effectively, with the whole Gen AI stuff, we're effectively going through some kind of like industrial revolution, right? So it's kind of the same as when printing presses came along, or when Henry Ford started making proper factories for building cars, and then the cars got replaced by robots. We're maybe getting to the stage where, robots can build cars and robots can also build software. So the question is always what comes next. But one possible impact is that it doesn't just make a software company faster and sort of easier to build. It also makes it cheaper, not least because there could be a pretty strong suppression on salaries. And, salaries in Europe are not massive, but in the US, it's not uncommon for, relatively early stage engineers to be on like $200,000 a year as their starting salary. I wonder if there's going to be a big impact on salaries, which maybe makes it perversely kind of easier for startups to actually hire people, and not be using the AI, which maybe means they can build more exciting things than just another Twitter clone or something like that. Because
they'll be forced to be more creative, you mean, as a natural conclusion?
Yeah, exactly. The real engineers are actually going to be able to be creative and build cool shit, whereas I don't think that the AI is just kind of repeating what it's seen elsewhere. So, I mean, I'm a little bit skeptical that general AI is going to build new things, and not in the software space, or nothing kind of cutting edge. I think that's still going to require creative humans.
I think you're probably right. Cool. So in terms of the CEO-CTO relationship then, if you were to give just one piece of advice to CTOs who are beginning to work with a CEO for the first time, or perhaps so they've switched to working with a new CEO, what would you give as sort of the key piece of advice to them?
I think one of the most important things is to work out whose vision you are working to. If it is a super technical product, then there's a good chance that it's the CTO's vision that you're working towards. And you've got to really work out how is your role as a CEO in kind of facilitating that vision or bringing it into business reality? Or is it more of a kind of business-driven product in which maybe the vision comes from the CEO, and in which case it's the CTO that's kind of there to effectively facilitate and realize that vision? Because if you get that wrong and you both think you're the visionaries, but you're even like 1 degree off from each other, we all know what happens. So if you do a 100-mile journey, you end up like 20 miles away from each other. And that was disastrous for startups. You have to both be aligned. Everyone has to be aligned. Everyone has to be aiming for the same North Star. So you just have to, I think you really have to make sure you're kind of agreeing on whose North Star you are actually following.
I love that one. It's one of the things I bang on about all the time is aligned strategies between tech and the business. So it's amazingly aligned there. Thank you. Cool. Stephen, if anybody wants to get hold of you or find you, where can they find you online?
The best place is probably LinkedIn, which you'll find by searching my name. I still am on Twitter with major_grooves. I today signed up to Threads and was surprised to find that it's not a barren wasteland. There's actually people in there. So maybe you'll find me on Threads.
Excellent. And what's the one thing that people should contact you for, Stephen?
They should contact me if they are interested in data infrastructure, and if they are maybe, if they've got an interest in data infrastructure, how to connect data together from different sources, just like geeking out on entity resolution, RAG, search engine technology, anything data-wise we are talking about.
Awesome. Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks so much, Stephen.
Likewise, it's been fun. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you very much for listening all the way through to the end. Just before you go, I'd like to ask you for one thing in return for putting together all these episodes of the CTO Playbook podcast for you. Please leave a review. Wherever you're listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whichever platform you're on, leaving a quick review will help more CTOs find the podcast and enable me to create more great episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the CTO Playbook.